I'm 29 years old, and one of the only things that's ever really helped me clear my head is camping. Not campgrounds or national parks where there's other people around. I'm talking true middle-of-nowhere camping. I grew up in Northern California, and I've spent the better part of my adult life learning to find those remote little pockets where you can still feel like the only person left on Earth. This story took place a few months ago. I had just broken up with my ex, and let's just say I was going through it. I needed to be alone. So one day, I just packed up my truck and headed out. I didn't have a specific plan. I just threw some gear together and decided to go back to a quiet riverside spot I'd stumbled across once before. It wasn't an official campsite or anything, just a little bend in the river you could reach if you followed this barely there dirt road past a whole lot of nothing. I got there sometime in the late afternoon, but the second I turned down the dirt path that led to the river, my stomach sank a little. There were already 2 trucks parked near the trailhead, one gray and one white. I couldn't see anyone around, but just knowing other people were out there kind of killed the vibe for me. I hadn't driven all this way out in the middle of nowhere to interact with people. I sat there for a second, debating whether I should just turn around and find another spot. But I told myself it was a big stretch of river, and chances were whoever owned those trucks were camped far enough away that I wouldn't even see them. I hiked maybe 15 minutes downriver when I saw 2 guys fishing up ahead. They looked like the type you'd expect to see fishing. Thick beards, a little overweight, heavy boots, but it seemed like they were more focused on something else. As I got closer, one of them quickly covered something with his jacket and gave me this awkward half smile. As I passed, he called out, saying something about how they were just target shooting cans and didn't mean to freak me out. I just gave a polite nod and kept walking without saying anything. As I kept walking, I couldn't help but replay the guy's comments in my head. It wasn't even what he said that bothered me. It was how rushed and awkward it came out. Like he was trying too hard to sound casual. I got that uneasy feeling you get when something doesn't quite add up, but I pushed it down. People out there weren't exactly known for their social skills. It wasn't that weird for rural folks to be a little off when it came to talking to strangers. I told myself to let it go and focus on finding a good spot to set up camp. I found a spot a little further down the bend where the trees were thicker and the trail dipped out of sight. It wasn't perfect, but it was tucked away enough that I felt like I had my own space. I set up camp, pulled out a book, and tried to settle in. It started raining lightly not long after, so I threw on my rain jacket and kept at it, letting the sound of the river and the soft drizzle drown everything else out. Later, I wandered down to the rocks by the river's edge to reflect a little bit. That's when I noticed someone across the water. It was one of the guys from earlier, the one who had called out to me, only this time he was alone. He spotted me and waved. I hesitated, then waved back, figuring it was better to be friendly. He yelled across, asking for my name. I don't know why, but I shouted back my real name, Anisha, without really thinking about it. He stood there for a second after I answered, then pulled something out of his jacket. At first, I thought it was a phone, but then I realized it looked more like a disposable camera. Before I could even process it, he held it up and took a picture of me from across the river. And then, without another word, he just turned and started walking back up the riverbank like nothing had happened. I was beyond creeped out. The weird speech patterns and mannerisms were one thing, but taking a picture of me, that was next level strange. I headed back to my campsite and just figured I'd stay put for the rest of the night. After the sun went down, I crawled into my tent and tried to get some sleep, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the breakup in my head, picking apart every word, every mistake, every what if. I don't know how long I lied there like that, just listening to the river and the light patter of rain against the tent. At some point, though, I started hearing something else. Faint, uneven sounds, like someone stepping carefully over wet ground. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the rain or some animal, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. Footsteps, circling the campsite, and the second I made that connection, my stomach dropped straight through the ground. I didn't even have to wonder who it might be. I'm no fool. I never go into the woods alone without protection, and this was no exception. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my handgun from where I kept it tucked by my sleeping bag. Then I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I needed to stay calm. I clicked my flashlight on and swept it across the trees, and there he was. That creep from earlier, standing a few yards away, half hiding behind a tree. He wasn't smiling or scowling, he just had this blank expression on his face like he wasn't all there mentally. The scariest part wasn't his demeanor though, but the fact that he was holding a small axe in his left hand. For a second, I couldn't move. All I could think about was how far I was from anyone, how nobody would even hear me scream if it came to that. But somehow, I managed to raise the gun and level it at him. I forced my voice to stay calm, even though every part of me was screaming. As sternly as I could, I said, "Leave now or I'll kill you." His facial expression didn't change at all. It was like my words meant nothing to him. After a few seconds of silence, he mumbled something about how his friend Ivan had discouraged him from coming to find me, and that he had to take care of Ivan. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I fired a shot straight into the trees above his head. He stumbled a bit, clearly not expecting me to do that. I leveled the gun at him again, a little more confident now. I told him it was his last chance and to drop the axe. He did, and a huge wave of relief washed over me. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. I told him to take his shoes off so that he'd have trouble following me, and then made sure he didn't have any other weapons on his person. Once I was sure he wasn't armed, I told him to go to my tent and grab my gear. I watched him like a hawk as he fumbled with my stuff, forcing him to toss it all out into the open where I could see it. I packed the essentials as fast as I could, never letting him out of my sight. I jammed the axe into my backpack and made sure I wasn't forgetting anything. I'd have to leave the tent behind, but that was a small price to pay for staying alive. I then grabbed his shoes and threw them as far as I could into the darkness, and I told him to walk in the opposite direction. I kept the light on him the whole time, and the moment he walked far enough out of sight, I turned and started hiking back up the river as fast as I could. That was the scariest part of the whole encounter, stumbling through the pitch-black forest in the rain with a potential murderer behind me. I wasn't sure if he was following me, but I didn't care. I just kept going, trying to use the flashlight as minimally as possible. Both pickup trucks were still in the pullout when I finally made it back to my car. I didn't stop though. I threw everything in and sped out of there. When I got cell service back, I called the police and reported the whole incident, describing my location as best as I could. A few months have passed since then, and I'm not sure if anything ever came of it, but I'm not going out of my way to find out. What still scares me most about the whole thing is that comment he made about his friend Ivan, that he quote-unquote took care of him. I really don't want to think about what that means, but there's only so many explanations. I'm just glad I was armed. I could have easily lost my life that night if I hadn't been. This story happened 2 summers ago, back when I was still dating Amanda. I've kept it to myself for a while, not because it's embarrassing or anything, but because I didn't want to risk unintentionally doxing her or her family. Now that we've been broken up for over a year, I think it's safe to talk about it. At the time, Amanda was working as a camp counselor for a summer program in the city. It wasn't exactly close to home, about a 25-minute drive from her quiet, wealthy suburban neighborhood. But she loved the job for reasons I still don't fully understand. I always thought it was a little beneath her, especially considering her aspirations in life, but I wasn't going to be a jerk and outright say that. Her house was exactly what you'd picture for a family in that kind of area. Big yard, 3 stories, high ceilings, and enough space to host just about any event. That's why when the camp counselors were deciding where to host their end of summer party, Amanda's house was the obvious choice. I'm probably making it sound like that was the first time she hosted camp-related parties, but that's not really the case. It just so happened that it was my first time experiencing one since I hadn't been dating her the previous summer. Her parents were out of town that weekend. They were always out of town, really. I don't want to get too deep into it out of respect, but Amanda's family dynamic was odd. Her relationship with her parents more closely resembled that of 3 colleagues rather than 3 family members. Everything was very transactional, and it was blatantly obvious to any onlooker that all 3 of them were versions of the same narcissistic, insecure person, even though they despised being compared to each other. That description's honestly a little harsh. Her dad was pretty chill, and I honestly missed the guy. But, you know, feelings. Anyway, the party was packed. Dozens of people crowded into the house and spilled out into the backyard. The vibe was lively and fun, and most of the guests were friendly and easygoing. Well, except for one guy, Pete. From the moment he showed up, I had a bad feeling about him. He was loud, overly confident, and spent way too much time talking to Amanda. It wasn't just small talk either, it was full-on flirting. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I felt disrespected, but I didn't want to make a scene. Amanda and I had been dating for a while, and while I trusted her most of the time, she had a bad habit of being a little too friendly with other guys. It was a sore spot in our relationship, and I knew bringing it up would only cause problems. I didn't want to come off as insecure, so instead of confronting Pete directly, I came up with a different plan. I started acting overly friendly toward him. Every time he finished a drink, I offered him another. We talked, laughed, and before long, Pete was drinking faster than he probably should have been. I don't exactly have the build of a heavy drinker, but the Irish and Mexican in my blood means my alcohol tolerance is always going to be absurdly high. My plan was to get him so wasted that he either made a fool of himself and the problem took care of itself, or he fell asleep and the problem took care of itself. It was a win-win. I was kind of surprised to discover that my plan had actually worked, and sooner than expected too. By midnight, he was passed out on the basement couches, drooling into a pillow. I was smug about it, but Amanda saw right through me. She accused me of doing it on purpose, which I denied. After some tense back and forth, I finally admitted that I may have played a small role in it. We argued a little, but it wasn't anything serious. Just another disagreement to add to the pile. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my petty stunt had put a damper on the night. As the party wore on, the house got louder, messier, and more chaotic. I needed a break, so I stepped outside to get some air. The driveway was cool and quiet, a nice contrast to the noise inside. I was leaning against Amanda's car, just staring up at the stars, when I noticed someone standing at the far edge of the property. The figure was motionless, just standing there in the dim glow of one of the street lamps. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. When they didn't move, I decided to approach them. It was probably the liquid confidence that made me do it. I don't think I would have done it otherwise. I asked, "Hey, can I help you?" trying to sound friendly, but a little assertive. The figure took a few slow steps towards me before stopping. It was definitely a man, that much I could tell, but I couldn't make out any notable features since it was so dark. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he asked, "Are your parents home?" The question threw me off. It wasn't just what he asked, it was how he said it, like he already knew the answer. Before I could respond, he repeated his question, this time name-dropping Amanda's parents. He knew who they were. That was enough to turn the unease I'd been feeling into full-blown suspicion. I lied and told the guy my parents were inside, even though part of me thought he knew I didn't live there and that I was lying. Still, I thought maybe I could deter him from doing whatever he was gonna do. The guy nodded and just said okay, before turning and walking away. I expected him to head to a car or another house, but he didn't. Instead, he walked straight down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I watched him for as long as I could, but it was too dark to tell where he went. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I tried to brush it off. I went back inside and ended up in the basement playing ping pong with a few other people. Amanda had a pool table upstairs, so most of the crowd was up there, leaving the basement quieter. I didn't feel like being my usual fun, social self, so I preferred the quieter atmosphere where I could actually hear people talking. At some point, I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I didn't think much of it. This was a party after all, so people coming and going wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But something in my subconscious was tugging at my brain, like there was something I was missing. As I stood there, mindlessly slapping a ping pong ball around, I realized what it was. Amanda had instructed everyone to come through the back door, which didn't even have a doorbell. That meant someone had come up to the front door, which wasn't supposed to happen. I excused myself from the game and headed upstairs, knowing I was probably overreacting but wanting an answer. As I walked past Amanda's room, I noticed she was passed out on her bed, completely oblivious to the chaos around her. That's when it hit me. I was probably the only somewhat sober person left in the house. I turned her bedroom light off and gently shut her door, trying not to disturb her. When I got to the front door, a girl named Bella was standing there. I asked if she knew who had rung the doorbell. She was belligerently drunk, so getting a coherent response out of her was about as easy as getting one out of a squirrel. That girl was also pretty brain-dead sober, which didn't help matters. Eventually, she said that there was some old guy at the door who claimed to be a family friend and needed to return something he borrowed. In response to that, I yelled, "You let him in?" She shrugged her shoulders and walked away, presumably to go spin the roulette wheel on which random guy she would be bringing home that night. I ran upstairs to Amanda's parents' room, and my worst fears were confirmed. Drawers were pulled open, jewelry boxes were empty, and the closet looked like it had been ransacked. That guy had robbed them. I figured he was already gone. I mean, the jewelry boxes were empty, the drawers were ransacked. It looked like he had taken what he had come for. I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed something move in the mirror on the back of the door. It was just a quick shift, like someone ducking out of view behind me. I turned around, but I wasn't fast enough. The guy tackled me before I even saw his face. He knocked the wind out of me as the two of us hit the ground, and I couldn't breathe. The guy started clawing at my shirt like he was trying to rip it off of me. With all the strength I had, I managed to push him off, but it was more panic than strength. He got up and sprinted straight across the room, dove out one of the open windows, and landed on the roof with a thud. I ran to the window just in time to see him drop into the side yard and take off running. I didn't chase him. I wouldn't have been able to catch him anyway. I just stood there, trying to process what had happened and catch my breath. The damage was done. He was gone. But the encounter took its toll. I didn't want to stay up any longer and chaperone everyone. I didn't want to be the guy to kick everyone out either, though, so I actually called the police and told them to help me kick everyone out. Most of the local officers knew Amanda's family, so it wasn't like they were going to arrest anyone or do anything drastic. The cops came and kicked everyone out, and I secretly thanked them for their help. After they left, I went downstairs, slapped Pete awake, and told him he had to find some way home. He threw up before calling an Uber. The next morning, Amanda had no choice but to call her parents and tell them what had happened. They were furious, as anyone would be, but Amanda didn't seem to care. She had always been rebellious, brushing off authority like it was beneath her. They didn't even bother calling the police. The house had no cameras, and they figured it would be a waste of time. I'm still not sure how that guy knew Amanda's parents weren't home. Part of me thinks whoever robbed them knew them in some capacity. Looking back, that night revealed more about Amanda than I wanted to admit. Her indifference, her carelessness, it was all a red flag I should have taken more seriously. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. This happened long ago when I was renting a small house in the town that I got my first real big girl job at. It was a small one-floor house with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and just enough living space for myself and occasionally hosting some people. I had been living there for a few weeks already. All was fine. The landlord, who I'll just call Michelle, was really friendly and understanding. I think she rented to me because she didn't want a male renting out her house. I'll skip unnecessary details and get right to the point. Something very weird started happening a few weeks into living there. One regular work night, I got a knock at the door. I went to the other side and said, "Who is it?" and no one responded. I didn't open it. No one should be knocking on my door late at night. It was early the next morning. I had finished getting ready for work and was about to leave. I opened my front door and saw a big post-it note taped to the storm door. It said, "Hello, beautiful." I right away remembered the knocks on the door from last night. It was no doubt the same person, but the big question was, who could it be? I crumpled it out of disgust and threw it in the trash, hoping and assuming it would be a one-and-done thing. It was that night that I got another knock at the door. This time a little earlier, while I was cooking dinner. I went over to the door, this time not saying anything, just listening. There was no peephole or glass to look through to the other side. I had no way of seeing who was there without opening the door, and that wasn't going to happen, as the storm door didn't lock. But this was the second night in a row, and now I was realizing this was some kind of stalker situation. I called my mom and dad to ask for advice, and really, they didn't even know what to say. My dad, who was a retired police officer, said that if I called the cops, they wouldn't really be of any help unless they were catching the person in the act. My dad advised me to not go outside late at night for a while, don't answer the door, and if it persists, that he'd come to town and spend a few days with me. So that was the advice I followed. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the storm door for another note, and part of me died inside when I saw another note stuck to the glass. This one said, "I like to watch you." I took a picture of it with my phone and sent it to not only my family, but Michelle as well. I asked Michelle if she had any kinds of issues with certain men or any stalkers. She acted appalled and shocked when I sent her a picture of the note and told her about the knocks. She assured me that she didn't have any stalkers and that she was in a long-term relationship. Still, I wasn't entirely convinced. I left a note on the door after work that day, saying if you're looking for Michelle, she does not live here. She only rents this house out. If you continue to come here, I will be reporting this to the police. Doing this gave me a level of comfort, actually. I thought this would end things. That night, every waking minute was spent with anxiety, worrying about hearing knocks at the door again. To my relief, there were none tonight. I went to sleep in relative peace, thinking my note worked. The next morning, I opened the door and removed my note from the glass, but then realized it wasn't my note. It was a new note, and it said, "I'm not looking for Michelle, I'm looking for you." And then it said my name, followed with, "I like watching you," like it said in the previous note. I sent it to my dad right away. I felt seriously ill. My dad packed a bag and drove up first thing. He was at my house by the time I got home from work. And work that day was rough because I couldn't think of anything except for this horrific situation. I even wondered if someone in my office could have been doing this, like this creepy guy Fernando. My dad and I waited to call the police together until later in the night when we figured whoever was doing this may be hiding out there already. We wanted them to see the police presence. We spoke with an officer outside. My dad said it must have been a busy night since they only sent one. My dad being a retired police officer obviously didn't hurt in this whole situation. After the officer left with his report, my dad stayed out on the front stoop for hours, even after I went to sleep. Obviously the person didn't return that night, and I moved out once I was able to pack all my things. Michelle was completely understanding. Thankfully, whoever was stalking me at that house didn't follow me to my new place, likely eliminating the possibility that it was a coworker. So I will likely never know who it was. I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnights, and she needed a caretaker with medical experience to watch her overnight. When I say once worked for them, I mean I literally worked once, just this night, and you're about to hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Martha. Her daughter's name, who contacted me, was named Colleen. It's possible Colleen didn't have any other family to watch her and didn't want to or couldn't afford to put Martha in a nursing home. Or it was possible that she felt more comfortable hiring somebody with some form of experience to watch over her. At the time, I was already a direct care worker for 2 other women who suffered some forms of developmental disabilities, so I had experience. But nothing prepared me for that night. Colleen left for work. Earlier that day, I worked my first job, so I was really pushing my body to exhaustion, trying to make as much money as possible. Colleen had introduced Martha and I. Martha had given me a smile before Colleen brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night. It was around 9 p.m. Colleen told me that Martha would sometimes walk around the house at night acting confused, and I'd need to calm her down and bring her back to her room. She specifically addressed this not to be a form of sleepwalking when I asked. She said it's one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I told her to rest assured that I'd know how to handle it. I spent my time initially in the living room catching up on my show. These jobs aren't super glamorous, and for the most part, it is a lot of sitting around. I heard footsteps from upstairs. I went to the stairway and looked up the stairs, then called Martha's name asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps go back to her room, and then the door closed. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to the living room and watched some more TV. It was maybe an hour later that I got up to grab my sandwich that I brought from the fridge. As I left the kitchen with a plate and my sandwich to go back to the couch, I nearly had a heart attack and dropped the plate when I saw Martha standing at the doorway. glass shattered everywhere. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me, "Who are you?" I reminded her who I am. I'm her direct care worker here to make sure she's okay. Everything she said at this point was in a loud scream. "Why are you here? I don't know you," things of that nature. I reminded her that we had just met and that her mother Colleen hired me to watch her and the house. This seemed to work for long enough for me to get her to come back upstairs with me and to her room. I brought her up a glass of water and some melatonin and clonazepam. I made sure she took both before going back downstairs. After a few hours, I was absolutely exhausted. I had to get a couple hours of shut-eye. There was a spare bedroom upstairs with a twin-sized bed where Colleen said I could rest if needed. I felt like at this point Martha was asleep for the night from the melatonin. I fell asleep within minutes, but I was asleep for only maybe an hour. I woke up to a sound from downstairs. It was this repeated slamming. Every 1 to 2 seconds, something from downstairs was being slammed. I jumped out of the bed. I had left the bedroom door open so that I'd hear anything if Martha got up. Case in point right here. When I got to the stairs, I realized the slamming was coming from the kitchen. I walked down the stairs in as quick of a speed as I could while still remaining quiet. Getting to the bottom, I peered around the opening to the kitchen, and what I saw was like a scene from a scary movie I'd seen before. I saw Martha in the darkness, standing in front of the oven, repeatedly opening it and slamming it shut. It was horrifying. When I say I saw Martha, I really only saw her silhouette. It was that dark in the kitchen. I said "Martha" really loudly, and she stopped, turned to her left at me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking towards me, towards the stairs. I said in a now softer, kind of scared-sounding voice, "Are you okay?" She got close enough to me where I could now see her facial features, and she looked at me with this blank expression, then walked right past me and started walking up the stairs. I followed her upstairs, but as soon as she got to her room, she slammed her door shut. I knocked on the door saying, "Martha, are you alright?" She didn't respond. I quietly opened the door just to peek inside, and I saw Martha at the side of her bed, just standing facing the wall. I've seen a lot, but this was some pretty unsettling behavior that I feel like is the exact kind of stuff you'd see in some scary movies, like I mentioned before. I walked over to her and gently eased her into the bed. When she was laying down, I covered her, and for what I was hoping would be the final time, I said "Goodnight, Martha," and shut her door. I went across the upstairs to the spare room and went back to bed. I purposely tried not to fall asleep for at least half an hour just in case she'd wake up again, but I don't even know if I made it that long. All I know is I fell asleep pretty freaking quickly. I woke up once again, however much later. The room was still pitch black, and the 1-hour alarm I set had not yet gone off. I looked around the room, wondering what woke me up. I didn't see what it was until I heard a sound from inside the closet. I then noticed the cracked open closet door, and the black shadow of a head peeking out of the closet. Again, I almost had a heart attack. I said "Martha." She didn't answer. I kept saying "Martha" a bunch of times until she pushed the door open, and I saw her approaching the bed slowly. She started saying what she was saying hours ago again. "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I tried calming her down, reminding her who I am. I reached for the lamp next to the bed and fumbled with it until it turned on. Martha was holding a huge kitchen knife in her hand. At this moment, everything changed. Martha was now a threat to my life, and I had to worry about myself, not her. I screamed at this point, "Martha, put the knife down." I guess my scream stressed her out because she got closer and started screaming back at me, still repeating, "I don't know you." I wasn't going to attempt to calm down a knife-wielding dementia patient. That was not in any job description. I mapped out a way to run around her in the bedroom, and I went for it. I jumped off the bed on the side further from her, and she screamed again, "Who are you?" She swung the knife at the air as I ran past her. It was a slow and weak swipe from what I saw, but nonetheless showed that she had intentions of actually using it. I got downstairs and grabbed my shoes and went outside. Instead of calling 911, I called Colleen as she requested I do if there's an issue. I was courteous in doing this because getting law enforcement involved is never doing anyone any favors. Colleen was yelling into the phone at me not to leave her, And honestly, I yelled back that she attempted to kill me and that I didn't call the police. She had to leave work, of course. I stayed outside of the house, making sure Martha didn't go anywhere until Colleen returned. When Colleen went inside, Martha was back in her bed asleep. Colleen went as far as accusing me of exaggerating the whole thing until she found the knife next to Martha's bed. To not give her any more fuel to blame me for any of this, I left out the fact that I ever went to sleep. But that doesn't mean that I felt in any way I did anything wrong. Colleen even offered me that room to sleep. I never worked in that house again. Martha was a scarier patient than I'd ever dealt with in any of my jobs in my 9 years of being a direct care aide.